Thank you all for being here today for this session of Women in Technology with Purpose, our Bodhi series. For people who don't know, this is Polestar's thought leadership series, and I'm in a fireside chat with our guest today, Esmeralda Benade from PepsiCo. Just to start with, I'm Vagisha, AVP for GCC practice at Polestar, and today's conversation is something that I've been looking for a while. In fact, if I really think about, there's always a version of me who dreamed exactly of this, a screen, a room full of audience, and talking something with someone for inspiration and a candid chat, right? So, very honored to be seated with a leader who's shaping the industry in ways that matter. About a speaker, before I share a glimpse of her extraordinary experience, I have to just start with one thing. There are some people who learn to read the numbers, data, and analytics, while Esmeralda has not just excelled in that, but also have learned to read the room and then taught organizations globally to do both at once. If I talk about her journey, her path here hasn't been a straight line at the top. It started out as an analyst, deep in reports and data in companies like South African breweries. And over 17 years, she worked her way up through trade marketing, account management, and capability roles before she landed a job at PepsiCo approximately 6.5 years ago. She currently leads revenue growth management capability globally at PepsiCo, which means she is the person who makes sure that fancy AI tools and analytics don't just sit on a dashboard, but actually change how teams price, promote, and sell every single day. Before this, she has led PepsiCo's digital transformation across Europe, Africa, and Middle East, and her academics background come from specialization in econometrics and finance. I think it's good to say that she definitely comes with sharp analytical skills, but I think her real gift, once you speak to her through this conversation, you will find that the real gift is actually for getting people and not just systems to embrace change. Esmeralda, it's truly fitting, genuinely, to have a leader like you to talk here about the topic, which is bridging AI to value. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Vajisha, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. But I would like to actually simplify this just a little bit if I may. So my career has essentially been turning complexity into decisions that actually get used. So with my love for numbers, I started in very analytical roles. If you think about models and data and optimization, but over time, I realized that the best insight in the world really has zero value if it does not change what someone does on a Monday morning. So my focus moved from just building capability to building belief, confidence, and real adoption. And whether we talk about revenue growth management or AI or any kind of transformation, it always comes back to the same question. How do we move from insight into impact? And I am really looking forward to unpacking that with you today.
Thank you so much. I mean, sounds like we have a lot to cover, but I look forward to the personal stories. That's always help us to connect with your journey. So let's get it right into it. I think before we kind of just get into the journey, just to simplify, we have an audience. To someone in our audience who doesn't really understand what RGM means, what would be the simplest explanation in 2 sentences would you like to share?
So I know you're saying 2 sentences, but I'd like to do 2 sentences and an example.
Go ahead.
Revenue management is really about using data to understand why people buy in a specific moment and then showing up in a way that feels really relevant to them and right for the business as well as our customers. So it's about making sure we have the right product at the right price with the right promotion in the right place based on the moment that the consumer is in. And the reason I want to use an example, just for everyone who's really new to really remember it by. So currently we're in a heat wave. I'm in Belgium. We're in the middle of a heat wave. So imagine that it's a really hot day wherever you are and that you walk into a store. You are not going to browse through all of the shelves in the store because you know exactly what you want. You want something cold, refreshing, and easy to just grab. So in that moment, the best decision is a single serve chilling drink placed right where you can see it. It's priced for convenience and it doesn't have to be on promotion because you need it now. Now, if you fast forward to a family meal time, you are shopping in the same category, so you still want to buy a drink. You are still the very same consumer because it's still yourself who's going to shop. You have bought this single serve earlier, but you are now shopping for a completely different occasion. Now it is about sharing, about value, and about at-home consumption. So the right choice here will be, as an example, a 2-liter bottle. It can be part of a bundle or promotion. It needs to be positioned in the aisle where you shop weekly and at a price point that makes sense for the bigger picture. So it is designing the packs to how we're pricing it, how it shows up in the store, and how sales teams actually bring to life with the consumers. And that really is RGM in practice.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Let's extend a bit further from the RGM capability, and I'm going to just focus on your international experience, right? It's through Europe, it's through Middle East, South Asia. So I believe none of these markets couldn't have been more different from each other. So that's a given. What I think would really help us to connect is across that journey, when you look back, what was the thread that really connected all of it? Something that was constant, regardless which market was, or what was the culture, the people, or the moment.
So if I look back, the common thread has never really been the market itself. It's always been the people. So these regions all were very different in terms of they face different challenges. They have very different levels of maturity. They have different ways of working, but the human side is something that is very consistent. Now, remember that people don't change because you hand them a model or a framework. They change when something suddenly makes sense to them. So it reminds me a little bit of travel. And I just came back from my very first trip to the UK, by the way, and the airport sign might change, the language and the food changes, but you still know what it feels like to arrive somewhere completely unfamiliar and try to find your way. For some people, this can really be daunting. Now, building capability is a lot like that. And my job has essentially been to make the complex feel more maneuverable by simplifying complexity, connecting analytics to real decisions, and then building confidence in people to actually use it.
Okay. And when you talk about the capability aspect, it could mean different things. Like let's get into more. So I'll tell you, for some of the capabilities could be learning, training programs. It could be some of the tools that you're equipped with, or organizations could have a governance structure, right? When you're talking about RGM capability, because you have done this firsthand, right? What does genuinely a world-class RGM capability look like? And how do organizations know they have built it? So what are the best practices that you have seen yourself?
Good question, Vijisha. So capability is one of those words that sounds very impressive, but like you say, it means very different things depending on who you are asking. So it could be in the form of tools or playbooks or training or workshops, frameworks, or even governance. For me, all of these things are the ingredients, but capability is what happens when those ingredients come together and actually change behavior. So let me compare it to something that's really real in my life right now, and it might be something that everyone else is facing as well. So 6 months ago, I joined activity app. So Better Me, it's 15 minutes a day. I've got videos of all of these trainings on my phone, accessible any time of the day. However, I haven't used it, which means that it's actually really useless because it hasn't changed my behavior, even though I pay for it. So RGM capability is the same. It's just, it isn't just about teams knowing the theory and the framework, but it's about how they use it naturally. So in real decisions and under real pressure without needing to be pushed. And we don't generally measure the success of capability building as a training completion to tick a box. But we
Mhm.
look at the decision quality and the consistency. So are there better trade-offs being made faster without any escalation? So you know that you have really built capability when a sales leader, as an example, walks into a customer conversation and instinctively thinks about trade-offs, not because a tool told them to, but because that is how they have learned to think. So success really is when the RGM mindset becomes how we operate as an organization.
Awesome. You touched something, and I also read it somewhere. It's where we see digital transformation, where digital is technology and transformation is people. And I want to sort of connect this back to RGM because that's what we are talking in terms of AI reality in RGM. And something I found, you have written publicly about this as well. While AI can optimize prices, right? You mentioned it's the people who can define the value behind them, and that's a really important distinction. Where do you where do you see that AI is genuinely transforming our RGM right now, and where do you think we're not yet there, and or probably we are overstating what AI can really do?
So this is certainly a really hot topic at the moment, and I constantly hear people asking similar questions. I also saw a post about this from Bionomics on LinkedIn just yesterday. You might have seen the same one, but from the Europe Shop Talk. So AI
Yeah.
is already transforming RGM in very meaningful ways, especially in the speed scale and the ability to process complexity far faster than any human team can. And it can help us to model different scenarios, to optimize recommendations, and to see patterns that we might otherwise miss. But there is still a part that is deeply human. AI can tell you the fastest route, but it cannot tell you why you are traveling in the first place. So it doesn't know if you want a scenic drive. It doesn't know if you want to stop for coffee, which I generally really want to. And it definitely doesn't know if you are driving your kids to school. So it can optimize a price, but it cannot define the value in a human sense. It doesn't know the customer relationship or the brand context or the strategic trade-offs that needs to be made. So for me, the bigger opportunity is not AI instead of humans, it is AI making judgment sharper. So it can't replace the commercial judgment. It can't understand the consumer behaviors or drive adoption on its own. And it might optimize for us, but in the end, humans still decide what matters. And I just want to say, if you're new to RGM and you haven't
Yeah.
read this book, so this is a
Hmm.
book, the
You'll have to call it
pricing,
out, the title.
yes,
The title, the pricing playbook.
Yes, the Pricing Playbook, a practical guide to revenue growth management in the age of AI. This is a book by Ingo Reinhardt, and he speaks about this extensively. So if you're new, go grab yourself a copy. It really is amazing.
Thank you so much. And I feel a little shattered because I thought like AI can talk, and all my nocturnal chats with ChatGPT about how the day goes and everything. I hope it get contextualized and stuff. But yeah, sure. I mean, definitely there is that nuanced, humanized interaction that sort of comes, and AI can bring in the you know the science, but what lies here, it's coming from humans. So great, taking a point. um would you be okay to connect this with what was the digital RGM transformation that you did, and because it was thoroughly across not just Europe but all the other geographies as well. Looks like a very enormous undertaking. Tell us, what was the difficult part in that transformation? Was it the tools, the people, the culture? What would you want to say around that?
That's a good question. So I think anyone who's ever tried to deploy a digital tool will actually agree with me. The hardest part is never the technology or the data, it's the habit. The kind of habit that doesn't announce itself loudly. And people would say all of the right things in meetings and they would support the transformation in principle. And then they will go back and use the old spreadsheet that they trusted. So I call that the silent resistance, and it's probably one of the most underestimated challenges in transformation. That actually taught me that transformation does not fail because people don't understand the future. It often fails because the past still feels safer. And that gap between intention and habit is where transformation lives or dies. Transformation really is not about launching something new, but it is about breaking what people are comfortable with and then replacing it with something better.
But how do you, just follow a question on this, how do you like successfully change habits? Old habits die hard, right? And it's difficult for all of us, I mean, across organizations, to let go of our former selves and beliefs and the ways of working. So how do you bring people along the journey and allow them to change habits?
So the magic is change management, which
Okay.
is easier said than done, right? So first you need to make the new way feel safer than the old way. And that does not happen through training alone. So training doesn't lead to people doing things. It happens when people see very clearly that the tool helps them to make a better decision faster and in a real situation that they actually care about. Secondly, you have to remove the escape route, if I could call it that. So if Excel remains the backup for every decision, people will always default to it under pressure, especially under pressure. So at some point, you need to shift from optional to expected, and not in a heavy-handed way, but by embedding the tool into the actual processes and decisions, so into the everyday ways of working. And thirdly, and probably the most important, you build the belief through people and not through platforms. When someone sees a peer using this tool in a customer conversation and get a better outcome, then that is when adoption accelerates. It's not the system convincing them, it's the story. So for me, driving adoption is less about pushing usage through tools and more about replacing the comfort with confidence and inspiring people through real use cases and naturally celebrating early wins.
Okay, awesome. Let's talk further on the change management aspect of it. So we are talking about AI led. So we hear that AI analytics tools are plenty, right? Again, getting people to use these analytic tools is one of the most consistently underestimated challenges, and that's across organizations. Now, you have stressed in every single answer of yours about change management programs, and you have built those things and gold standard playbooks, right, to solve this. You tell us exactly where is a challenge in the adoption, what really breaks it, and is there a sustainable way to permanently fix this, across teams and even across leaderships?
So adoption usually breaks when we design for logic, but we forget that people are not purely logical. So we generally assume that if the tool is good enough, people will naturally use it, but people do not adopt tools just because they exist. They adopt what they trust, what they understand, and what genuinely helps them in their flow of work. So not adding more to their work, it needs to be part of the flow of work. So it reminds me very much of when someone recommends a new restaurant. You don't go to the restaurant and then just trust the entire menu immediately. You will most probably ask the waiter or the waitress what they would recommend. And that is how adoption works too. So remember that driving adoption is a journey from creating awareness all the way to this is how we do business. People need proof, they need relevancy, and they need confidence. And we do this by involving the teams early on in the journey. So you need to hear from them, you need to include their perspectives, you need to design a tool with the user in mind, making the value visible early, embedding it into real decisions and into existing forums or platforms, and creating tool champions who make it feel practical rather than theoretical. So a key tip for everyone in this call today: adoption spreads much faster through stories than through instructions.
Okay, awesome. Let's start with also getting deeper into what you mentioned about adoption, into making people change. And I would link it to the programs that you have drawn, regarding RGM. So in your current role, you have designed and deployed multi-tier RGM learning ecosystems and across markets, functions, and like we discussed, leadership levels, right? That's a very different challenge from building a standard training program. How do you design learning? Because this learning actually demands people to change how people will think, execute, and work, and not just a training about what they do, what do they know, and from that depth. So tell us more about that.
So the biggest mistake in learning, Vijisha, is assuming that if someone understands something intellectually, that they will automatically apply it. And we all know that that is not true. Knowledge does not equal behavior. So it's just like passing your learner's driver's license. You know the rules of the road. You understand all the signs that you see, but that doesn't mean that you now will comfortably and confidently go and drive in peak hour traffic on the highway. So when I think about learning ecosystems, I think less about the content delivery and more about the behavioral design. So how do we create experiences that feel real and relevant and practical enough to shift how people make decisions? And that really means speaking their language. So when you talk to different functions, you need to speak their language, using real business scenarios that is relevant to them, and creating moments of reflection, giving people the room to practice the judgment, like as an example, giving a safe space to fail or to test thinking through scenarios, and not just expect people to absorb information. And most importantly, we actually help people to see the impact of their decisions, because learning becomes real when someone experiences the consequence of a trade-off. This is then the shift from teaching content to changing thinking. And the goal is not for someone to say, oh, that was interesting after a training session. The goal is really for them to walk into a meeting the next day and already think differently.
Okay, so we'll just talk about, so you said instead of saying that's interesting and to have the emotion move to let's change it tomorrow. That's the purpose of every single leadership, this sort of a training that you're imbibing. But does it equip everybody to have, the same level of understanding the next day and kind of change, like where the change would start across? If you want to kind of annotate it with your any live experience, that will also help.
So you need to keep in mind your audience. You will not have the same learning, training, workshop, whatever it is, for a senior leader or a VP than you have for someone that is completely brand new into the function. It needs to be really relevant to your cohort and build the functional knowledge as they go along the journey.
Okay, awesome. So starting with leadership, that does the strategy. We all have a strategy at the beginning of the year for the programs, right? And one of the things that you have, with from experience in your conversation, you have shown is bridging strategy to execution. And not just in one organization, but, with your work at PepsiCo, it has been highly across diverse markets and stakeholders. The gap in your experience, do you think it comes in between what the strategy is saying and what's actually happening on the road where the rubber meets the ground, right? The most transformations, they kind of lie in between. Why do they quietly sort of fail or get stalled in that? And how do you do things differently to kind of come over it and, make sure that ultimately the strategy met its goal?
So I believe that this gap exists because strategy is often created in one language, and then it is expected to land in many different other languages. So I was at the POI Summit in Amsterdam in May, and one of the keynote speakers presented something that stayed with me that's really, really relevant to this question that you just asked me. It was a bridge that was broken in the middle, with strategy standing on the one side and execution standing on the other. Now, at a very senior level, the strategy sounds clear and compelling, but when it reaches different functions right in the middle, like sales, finance, and marketing, as an example, everyone interprets it slightly differently based on their own priorities. So bridging that gap is less about refining the strategy and it's more about translating it together. I can compare this to planning a trip. Everyone agrees on the destination, but very quickly you realize everyone has different expectations. Someone wants speed, the other wants comfort, someone wants to go on the scenic route. And if you do not align upfront, you might all be moving, but in very different directions.
Yeah.
And that is exactly also what happens in organizations. So it's very important to focus on bringing people along early and deliberately, and on making the strategy simple enough that everyone can understand it, but also specific enough that it drives choices. So when you think about this logically, there are a few critical things that you need to align on. What are the trade-offs that we are willing to make, and what are we absolutely not going to do? What role does each function play in delivering this? So what is the RASI, or the ways of working? What are the KPIs that truly matter? So not the entire kitchen sink of KPIs, but the very few that signal success. And most importantly, how does this show up in day-to-day execution? So strategy only works when it becomes shared ownership. And I've really found that when people are part of the shaping part, then rather than just receiving it, you move from compliance to commitment.
Okay, awesome. Something that I would want to ask, not from just the RGM standpoint, but the theme of the series, women in tech, and your experience in RGM especially. So I'm going to be slightly assuming, so please correct me if if my theory is slightly wrong here. So you're in a field of RGM and commercial analytics that has historically been male dominated. I'm taking a step here. And you have built over your 17 years a genuinely global career across continents, right? Today, if you just are comfortable sharing, what has the journey been about navigating some of these spaces where you're often the only woman in the room, right? And what started like when you were starting, what today you're able to do it more confidently, and how would you, tell a younger person or a younger woman starting out in the field today?
Oh, Vijisha, this is such a great question and it gets me so excited. So it actually taught me that being different in the room is not a weakness, it can be your superpower. So very early in my career, I often felt unsure of myself, especially being surrounded by mostly men, like you say. It used to be that way. And even more so when I had the opportunity to sit in meetings with very senior leaders while being the most junior person in the room. So I actually spent a lot of energy observing, trying to read the room, and telling myself that I needed to be completely ready and completely certain before I even spoke. But over time, I realized that holding back does not create impact. And interestingly enough, one of the most valuable things that I've learned from the many men around me was their willingness to take chances. They speak up even when they don't have all the answers, and they build confidence through actions and not perfection. And that actually shifted something for me. I realized that my perspective, even when it felt a little bit different, was not only valid, it was actually needed. And when we work in teams, we work really well with people that have different strengths than us. And which means that I didn't need to sound like everyone else. I just needed to be clear and thoughtful and willing to step into the conversation. And that actually changed everything. Sometimes different thinking can change the strategy for the better altogether. Because when the real value in a room doesn't come from everyone thinking the same way. It comes from the diversity of thought, from someone asking a different question, seeing a different angle, or even challenging the direction, but in a constructive way. And that is true for women, but it is also true for anyone who has ever felt like the only one in the room. So the biggest barrier is really capability, but it is self-belief. So my advice is really simple. Don't wait until you feel ready because you probably never will. Don't assume everyone else has it figured out, because most people don't. Even I figure out things as I go along the way. Speak up a little earlier than feels comfortable. Take a few more chances than you think you should, and lean into what makes you different. You are exactly where you are supposed to be.
Thank you so much. I mean, something that I also reconcile with what when I started out my career, often used to hear, "Oh, you're getting too big for your shoes," and I was like, just get the job done, and just speak out whatever you have to share. So get the nerve to get the ball rolling. So thanks a lot. I mean, I'm happy. A lot of us feel that way, and that's the way to go. Um, when we're kind of looking at building some of these women leaders, and RGM especially, when you're looking at the next generation, right? Besides the confidence that all of us we need to have and the ability to speak, in the room, what capabilities would they need today? The next generation of RGM leaders, the younger woman that you just shared a message for, right? So what capabilities are they going to need today that today's programs aren't fully preparing them for?
That's a good question. So let me tell it as a story that we have all seen. A few years ago, the best RGM person in the room was the one with the sharpest model, the cleanest analysis, the perfect answer, and that worked up to a point. So today, the room has actually changed. You now walk into a meeting where everyone has data. Everyone has dashboards. AI can generate 5 different recommendations in seconds. And yet, people are still stuck, not because they lack insight, but because they don't, or they can't agree on what to do with it. So that is where the next generation of RGM leaders will then stand out. They won't be the ones with just the best analysis. They'll be the ones who can pause the room and say, here's the decision we need to make. Here are the trade-offs, and this is what it means to all of us. They will connect the dots between the different functions, so sales, marketing, and finance. They'll turn complexity into clarity, and most importantly, they will bring people with them. They will be the ones with the decision leadership skills, being able to cut through the complexity, align the stakeholders, and drive action. Because the reality is the hardest part is not finding the answer anymore. It is getting 10 people with 10 different priorities to move in the same direction.
Awesome. If we kind of can get into, just bringing RGM capabilities, leadership, we spoke about strategy and execution. I think one thing that I want to just kind of sum it up, in probably my last question to you, and then we'll go to a very fun round after this, is the topic itself, the bridging the gap from AI to value. And we spoke about how it needs to be humanized, context, people, relationships, ability to change and think through, and being, the ability to speak in the room. But help us to understand the gap, the bridge strategy and execution that you said. It's a gap that almost every organization is struggling with. In your experience, having worked with so many leaders across functions and across different hierarchies, right? Is it a data problem? Is it a cultural problem? Is it people are unhinged to kind of change, or it's a mindset problem? So, or something entirely. So where would that answer lie in that gap?
So let me answer this in a way that shows up in real life. You walk into a business today, and it looks like everything is there. There's data, there's dashboards, there are AI models generating recommendation. It doesn't seem like anything is missing, and yet the decisions don't happen. So, or it happens too late, or everyone walks out of the room aligned, but then goes and does something really different. And that to me is the gap. So it's really tempting to label it as a data problem or a tool problem, but in reality, it's something much more human. It's what I call the last mile of belief. Because value doesn't come from having the answer, it comes from someone trusting it enough to act on it. So the gap is made of small but very real frictions. Do I trust the output, especially when it's a new AI tool, as an example? is this relevant for my customer? What exactly am I supposed to do differently? So the RC is very important, and the so what afterwards is really important. And if this goes wrong, who actually owns this? So when those questions aren't fully answered, people default to what feels safer, which is experience or instinct, or even that spreadsheet that they've always used. So the gap from AI to value is not one single thing. It is a combination of trust in the insight, clarity on the action, confidence to follow through, and the alignment across people to move together. It's less about building better models and more about making decisions feel clear, safe, and actionable in real moments. And I always say, so it's about making the decision, taking hands, and taking the leap. So jumping, which just means we're saying, let's do this differently, and then you actually do it.
Thanks a lot, Esmeralda, for those questions. I think thank you for bringing your personal life stories and those examples. A lot of us relate to that. B, there's something that feels so aspirational, and I think this audience that could come from any walks of life, there's something so much that we can take back from this understanding. Now, serious stuff, we'll park it aside. We'll get on to something fun. I was documenting some questions, that I can ask in something called a concept called rapid fire. You're lucky we don't do this in every Bodhi series thought leadership session. So we'll do this in a fireside chat. So one word or one sentence, and we'll go super quick, right?
Okay.
So let's start. RGM without data, possible or pointless?
Possible, but it's basically then educated guesswork with really great storytelling.
Okay. The one capability every RGM team is missing right now.
I think turning the that's interesting into we're doing this tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. I remember you said that earlier as well. Great. AI in RGM, overhyped or underhyped?
I believe overhyped in slides, but underused in real decisions.
Yeah, that has to be. I mean, reality is slightly different. So, okay. So best piece of career advice you have ever received?
Find comfort outside of your comfort zone.
Okay. Strategy or execution, which is harder to get right? I think I know this answer.
So I would say execution, where strategy is the plan, execution is the reality check.
Yeah, it's harder to execute anyway.
Yes.
One word to describe the future of RGM.
Connected.
Okay. Something that RGM community needs to talk more but doesn't.
I believe trade-offs, because no matter how much we try, we can't optimize everything.
Okay. Last line, as you summed up. So what does bridging the gap from AI to value look like in one sentence?
When the recommendation actually changes, what happens in the next meeting?
Great. I think I'm done. This is quick rounds. This is all I could capture while I was taking some snippets out of this. But thank you so much. This was a fun round, Esmeralda. And honestly, half of those answers need their own episode. Now we can sort of open up to our audience some of the questions we have. We have 15 minutes. We can bring some of those questions up. Would you like to take some of the questions from the chat that you feel can also be a recap and complement the discussion that we have?
Sure. So I am quickly having a look. So Kartik Chaudhry asked, you've talked about moving from insight to impact, but how do you actually measure capability once it's been built? What are the 2 or 3 signals you look for that tell you the investment in learning and adoption has genuinely landed beyond the usual training completion rates? And I think I touched a little bit about on this in one of the earlier questions. So we have actually moved beyond ticking the box of these are the number of people that we've identified as possible learners, and this is the number of people who actually came to the learning and completed it all the way, who submitted their assessment or whatever it is. And we actually look at how people change the decision. So when you go into a revenue council or a QBR or any forum, was there decisions that was made a little bit differently? So what is the decision quality from to after you have done any of your capability building tactics? And that can come through in numbers as well. So it could then positively impact, as an example, your net revenue or your market share or your NRR. So when your capability moves into action, it actually shapes the numbers as well.
Okay.
Let me see. You've spoken about silent resistance and the gap between intention and habit, but some resistance isn't silent. It comes from senior leaders who feel threatened by what the transformation represents. How do you navigate that level of resistance where the obstacle isn't a habit but a person with real influence? So, Rupesh, I believe that if this happens, if it is a resistance from a senior leader, you always need to make sure that what you are doing is actually aligned to their strategy. So as an example, sitting in an international team, we don't just go with a blanket approach and give everyone everything. It needs to be aligned to what that market needs. And that creates the automatic pull from the market side. And you need to include the leader as well as the cross-functional teams right from the start. So you can't bring them in afterwards. And adoption doesn't start with the training. It starts with this is the communication that goes out throughout. So constant communication, showing the value very early on and bringing people along the journey. And that is the simplest way to actually put it. A lot of the RGM capability discussions assumes reasonably mature data infrastructure, but many markets, particularly in EMESA and SSA, are working with fragmented, incomplete, or unreliable data. How do you build meaningful RGM capability in markets where the data foundation isn't there yet? Oh, so this is something that I know very well because I used to work in SSA and in EMESA, and I know that some markets don't have the richness of data that others do. So what we do is we look at the level of maturity, and then you will design different capability or models based off of the data that they have. So it's different archetypes that you deploy to those markets. So as an example, you might not necessarily have the access to consumer panel data in Africa, but going into trade, speaking to your cross-functional teams, speaking to distributors, just as a broad example, you can get some of the insights just from doing that. And when you want to deploy something that's really new, you might not be able to do a conjoint analysis because you don't have data, but you can do a test and learn.
Esmeralda, I think this is an interesting question I was just going through. Arjun had said, and it links to the question about adoption. He says that adoption spreads faster through people than platforms. We spoke of it, and that local champions matter enormously. How do we identify those champions? And how do we ensure that it turns out to be the right one?
Okay, so generally, it would be the person who would be you identify as the owner of the tool, who would be using the tool constantly and bringing the tool to other users within the market. It can, as an example, if it is a post-event analytics tool, where you look at how your promotions performed, it might be a revenue management person who is responsible for promo analytics. And this person might run the analytics the first few times after the model was released, but then they actually build a capability within the rest of the organization. And we must never underestimate the power of the water cooler talk. So you actually want that person to go and stand at the water cooler saying, hey, have you heard that we have just released this tool and we're already seeing great we're changing our promo strategy. We have cut what doesn't work and we have saved $5 million or whatever it is. So you actually want that person to advocate for the tool. So I would say it needs to be someone who gets their hands dirty in the tool, who can really advocate for it.
Awesome.
I'm quickly having a look. So how do you manage the tension between global platform standardization and what actually works on the ground for a specific market or a team? My advice would be, and this is what we do as well, is the 80-20 rule. So you build the global gold standard, which is the 80%. How you do, and then 20% localization. However, you can't just be the global team sitting in the ivory tower deciding, oh, this is what gold standard needs to look like. You do speak with all of the markets to see what is the need or similarities across different markets and then archetypes to be able to say, okay, so based off of the feedback from all of these markets, this is actually what we need to do to get to a gold standard. And then the rest would all be the 20% localization. So I've read that one. How do you create genuine trust across sales, finance, and marketing functions that have historically worked in silos, especially when trade-offs mean one function wins and the other doesn't? That's a great question, Kuldeep. So it is really difficult to break down silos, but in today's world, it is extremely important that you do that. And I believe that, as an example, RGM needs to have a seat at the table. So whenever there is a discussion where marketing and finance is in a room, RGM also needs to be there when, as an example, there's a brand decision being made, because it flows through in your OBPA, in how you design your pack price and your portfolio. So RGM really needs a seat at the table. So one really great example of what we did at PepsiCo was to have it was a learning, but not really a learning. It was an applied learning, so a really great experience to our revenue management leaders, where we brought the different functions into the same room, looking at a business problem within their market, and together they had to go and solve this problem. So through that, they actually saw the value of working together cross-functionally. Everyone has the same data, everyone has access to the same insights, but it is about how we come together and actually use it in unison. Oh, sorry. And the last part of that question, I think performance is important, but yes, sometimes one function like sales could go and aim for volume, while finance aims for margin. We might say we need to drive NRR, but we need to align upfront on those KPIs. So what is it that we as a company are aiming for? And then we create the visibility across the different functions to all drive the same KPIs.
Okay, let's just take one last question. I'm reading one question. I think that's something that we spoke about in the learning, the learning program. So Ali asked, you mentioned giving people a safe space to fail as part of learning, but in large organizations, especially FMCG, where every market has targets and visibility, failure is rarely safe. What would you say to create psychological safety in an environment like this?
So allow people to voice their opinions fearlessly. Everyone should have a say in the room. When you have open discussions, and also bring to the table strategies that didn't work, and then discuss how we as a team can work on redesigning the strategy, or what is the key elements that cause the strategy to not work. So bringing to light what doesn't work is also okay. We learn from failures and we learn together, as long as we all take hands and move together as a team.
Awesome. Is there any question that we have left? I think some of the questions were comments to the main questions, but what we can do is we can share this list of questions with you, Esmeralda, and you can help us with your responses. I think that really help, and we can share it. But thanks so much, genuinely, for this candid conversation. I think we should have done this earlier. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, and then and I think it's practical and honest, and we speak about what doesn't work as much as what does. So thank you so much, and to everybody who joined in, not just from Polestar but across. I mean, thank you so much for being here for this episode with Women in Technology with Purpose. If there is anything that you learned today, new, or are able to think differently, I think I will call it a success. That's what we do. Until the next season, please take care and look forward to speaking with you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijisha. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.